All right, let's talk about the king of the dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus rex. We all have this picture in our heads of this massive, terrifying predator, right? Well, what if I told you that picture is way, way too small? A new study suggests the T Rex might have been so much bigger than we ever thought possible. We're going to get right into it.
You see, for years, we've based our idea of the T Rex's maximum size on the fossils we've actually dug up. But that's the thing, it's only based on what we've found. So that begs the really exciting question: what if the biggest T Rex that ever lived is still a ghost, a phantom that's completely missing from the fossil record?
Okay, so before we dive into these wild new possibilities, let's ground ourselves in reality. Let's look at what the actual bones, the physical evidence tell us about the biggest T-Rexes we know for a fact existed. Meet the champions. For the longest time, the T-Rex known as Sue was the gold standard. We're talking about 9 tons and almost 13 meters long. Then we found Scotty, who is even bigger, a more robust animal, tipping the scales at a truly massive 10 metric tons. These aren't guesses, these are facts on the ground. This is the baseline for how big a T-Rex could get. But, and this is a huge but, the biggest one we've found is almost certainly not the biggest one that ever lived. And this is where we run into what you might call a gigantic fossil problem. Just look at this number. Scientists estimate that over a 2.5 million-year reign, something like 2.5 billion individual T-Rexes walked the Earth. I mean, that number is it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And out of that entire population of 2.5 billion, how many decent fossils do we have to study? Fewer than 100. That's it. We're trying to understand this entire species from a sample size that wouldn't even fill up a single large museum room. The odds that the absolute heavyweight champion just happened to be in that tiny sample? Pretty much zero. And here's the perfect way to think about it. It's like trying to find the tallest person on the planet by just picking 100 people completely at random. You'd never ever find them, right? That's the exact problem scientists are up against, a little something called preservation bias. So, if we can't just dig up this monster, how on earth do we figure out how big it was? Well, the answer isn't in a shovel, it's in the data. Scientists basically decided to use powerful computer modeling to go hunting for this phantom T-Rex. So what these researchers did was pretty brilliant. They used some heavy-duty statistical methods to build a kind of digital T-Rex world. They factored in that fossil bias, they created a massive virtual population, they modeled how these dinos would grow and die, and then they used all that info to predict what those missing giants at the very top would have looked like. They ran the models, they crunched all the numbers, and the answer they got back was, frankly, mind-blowing. We're talking about a potential 70% jump in body mass over any T-Rex we've ever seen. So get ready for the 15-ton revelation. And this is it, the big moment. After all that work, after all that data, what did the model finally spit out? Just how big could the true, undisputed king of the dinosaurs have gotten? 15,000 kilograms. That's 15 metric tons. Just let that sink in for a second. That's a 70% bigger animal than Scotty, who is already a giant. This isn't just a slightly larger T-Rex. This is a creature in a whole different league.
And this really drives the point home. You can see our record holders, Sue and Scotty, right there on the left. And then, look at the projected maximum. It just completely dwarfs them. The difference is absolutely staggering.
Okay, so the math says a 15-ton T-Rex is possible. But here's the next huge question. Is it physically possible? Could an animal that big actually walk around without just collapsing under its own weight? This is where we run smack into the laws of physics. Yeah, it all comes down to a fundamental rule of biology called the square-cube law. It sounds complicated, but the idea is actually super simple. As an animal gets bigger, its weight goes up way, way faster than the strength of its bones. Eventually, you hit a point where you're just too heavy for your own skeleton. And for a 15-ton T-Rex, the consequences of this law would be extreme. It would have to be built like a tank, with insanely thick legs just to hold itself up. And you can forget those scenes of it chasing jeeps in the movies. Running? Absolutely impossible. Just tripping and falling would have been a death sentence. The impact alone would probably shatter its skeleton. So what you get isn't that agile hunter from popular culture. No. You get a slow-moving, walking fortress. Its main strategy would have been its incredible size, using that sheer bulk to just walk up to other predators and scare them away from their hard-earned meals. The ultimate bully of the Cretaceous era.
All right, so we've looked at the mind-bending statistics, and we've checked in with the hard reality of physics. So let's bring it all home and deliver a final verdict on this new, supersized T-Rex. So here's the bottom line. Is a 15-ton T-Rex credible? The science says absolutely yes. The statistical modeling is solid. But what about some of those crazy claims you might see about an 18-meter-long T-Rex? Well, that's where we have to say no. That's not supported by the models, and it would pretty much break those biomechanical laws. A huge increase in mass doesn't automatically mean a huge increase in length. So, a 15-ton T-Rex is a totally plausible ghost hiding out there in the statistical shadows of the fossil record. And that leaves us with a final, really cool thought. If we've been underestimating the most famous, most studied dinosaur of all time by this much, what other, even stranger giants are still out there just waiting to be discovered?